Good and evil, morality. These are things that have been discussed since the dawn of man. I want to focus that subject on the Star Wars universe, however. In the Star Wars movies, you had the evil Emperor and the good Luke Skywalker. Good and evil was very clearly defined. But is evil always so easy to define? Is morality so black and white? Does a gray area, an area in between, also exist? The story of TSL, or Kotor 2, provokes this sort of thought and questions the standard Star Wars view of morality. Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords, or known as Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords, a really long title that you'll never hear me refer to the game as. I will be referring to it as Kotor 2. This is a game that was created back in 2004. It's a sequel to Kotor 1, which was done by BioWare. The second game was done by Obsidian Entertainment because BioWare didn't feel they had enough time because they were focusing on their projects Jade Empire and Dragon Age, which were unique projects to BioWare. Obsidian Entertainment had a few lead developers from a studio called Black Isle Studios, which is now defunct. They're known for doing games like Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Fallout 2, Planescape Torment, and Chris Avellone was the lead designer. They asked Chris Avellone to do Kotor 2. One thing he knew off the bat was that he wanted a darker atmosphere for Star Wars. He loathed the simple 2D characters that were easily defined as good and evil. And this is sort of why he wrote the characters the way he did, including the main characters, because they have this very, gray area to them. You can think in one light, maybe they're evil, maybe they're good, maybe they're both. And that's sort of what I think the lead developer wanted you to understand, was that things aren't so clearly black and white, and sometimes you have a little bit of gray area in between. This is a sort of new concept in the Star Wars universe, especially at the time, because when you saw the Star Wars movies, as I mentioned in the very beginning, you had a very easy idea of what was evil. The red lightsaber, the dark robes, the force choke, the mask, the breathing. You knew that was evil. And then whenever you saw the young kid with the lightsaber, green lightsabers, blue lightsabers, you're like, oh, these are the good guys. They're working with the Republic, or they're working with the rebels. They're trying to fight against the tyrannical Emperor or Empire. The game takes place 5 years after the conclusion of the first game, and during the times of the Dark Wars, which is a period in which the Sith Assassins are tracking the remaining Jedi and trying to kill them off for good. I say remaining because if you guys aren't familiar with the previous game or the plot, the Mandalorian Wars occur because the Mandalorians, a warlike tribe of people, decide to pick a fight with the Republic because they deem them worthy of a battle. I won't go into complete details about the full reasons they attack the Republic because it's an important part of the story, so for now, we will stick with because they wanted a worthy adversary. Although the Republic is powerful, it wasn't prepared for the Mandalorian Wars. Many Outer Rim territories get slaughtered by the Mandalorians. The Republic then asks the Jedi Council for help, but the Council was slow to act because they believed there could be something else at play, possibly a hidden threat. This angers notable Jedi like Revan and Malak, who create a crusade focused on protecting the Republic and winning the Mandalorian Wars. In KOTOR 2, you play as the Exile, who also chose to go fight with Revan and Malak as a general of the Republic forces. However, at the conclusion of the war, both sides take heavy casualties. The Jedi who went to fight in the war are angry at the Council. They believe that they were slow to move and blame them for many of the deaths that occurred. This creates a civil war in which Jedi are fighting Jedi, and many Jedi start to fall to the dark side and become Sith. That's as far as I'll go into the story because I don't want to spoil too much yet, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys the backstory of the plot. Although KOTOR 2 was seen as mostly successful, it wasn't quite the knockout its predecessor KOTOR 1 was. Metacritic gave KOTOR 1 a 93 metascore and a 9.0 user score. KOTOR 2, however, it only got an 85 metascore and an 8.4 user score. This was largely due to KOTOR 2 being a rushed product. LucasArts was pressuring Obsidian Entertainment to complete the game, but Obsidian didn't have enough time to finish the game, so they consequently had to cut a lot of content from the game. Luckily, however, a team of modders created the TSL RCM, or the Restored Content Mod, the Sith Lords Restored Content Mod to be specific, and M4 780p, a droid planet that was ripped from the original game. Both of these mods restored a lot of content to the game. I can personally attest to how much these mods really helped the gameplay better, especially towards the end with the Restored Content Mod. Once you get to the ending sequence of the game, the Restored Content Mod adds a lot of extra content that was cut. And M4 780p, well, it's an entirely new planet to explore, so that's a whole lot of extra content. We're talking hours of added content. So after hearing the Metascore reviews, you might be asking, well, why did you choose to do KOTOR 2 over KOTOR 1? Sure, there's restored content, but Kotor 1 was widely more acclaimed, right? Well, this is an easy answer. It's the complexities of the game. Kotor 1 was the equivalent of a cereal box villain. You knew exactly what you were going to get, especially because the villain had to keep reinforcing to everyone that, well, they were a villain. Almost like they were literally telling everyone, I am a villain, over and over again, so you could remember that they were evil. Plus, there's always that really terrible, cheesy laugh. In KOTOR 2, things aren't so black and white. You don't really know who the villain is in the very beginning, right? And even when you do encounter the evil characters, there's also characters who are called evil by other good characters, but those characters aren't so easily defined as good or evil. For example, if you take the Exile into account, you disobeyed the council in order to go help innocents. That's very contradictory in a way. You're breaking the rules, therefore you are at risk to falling to the dark side according to the council. However, not doing anything and not helping those innocents, is that just as evil as going to help them? More evil? These are the type of questions that the game asks you. So let's talk about what made KOTOR 2 so great. The characters, the story, and just the overall complexity of it all. Starting with the characters. The Exile. Well, I don't want to talk too much about the Exile since the Exile is, well, you play as the Exile. The Exile was a Jedi general in the Mandalorian War who was largely a reason for the defeat of the Mandalorian forces. She activated the mass shadow generator which killed the entire surrounding fleet. Due to the massive loss of life, including other Force sensitives, the event created a wound in the Force. A wound in the Force was a type of disturbance where essentially a hole was created. This hole creates echoes throughout space. Obi-Wan mentioned this whenever Alderaan was destroyed in the trilogy movies. This wound was so great that the Exile couldn't take it and deafened herself to the Force. This saved her life, as assassins were trying to hunt down the remaining Jedi after this Jedi Civil War. She was put on this ship to Paragus, essentially because she was recovering from her, I guess, deafening. She was kind of sent there by Kreia and then ended up being intercepted by Darth Sion, and that's why he's able to track you to Paragus. So let's talk about the other characters. I'm going to start with Atton simply because he's easier to explain than Kreia is, as Kreia is one of the very important characters who has a massive backstory. So Atton is the cocky flight pilot. He's got a storied past, and as you gain favor with him, you can sort of figure out that he has even a dark past. It's sort of the reason why he's rather secretive and humorous in a way. He tries not to take anything too seriously because you can tell he probably has maybe a sense of pain, darkness within him. I feel like in the game, he's the character whose perspective can change probably the most besides you as the player, due to how you interact. He's the female exile romance option, often considered a canon romance partner, simply due to the female playthrough being considered quote-unquote canon. I'm not going to keep saying quote-unquote canon anymore. The reason why I'm saying it is because, as you guys know, Disney bought the franchise. We're not really sure if KOTOR is even canon anymore. I'm going to say that this is the canon idea, simply because it's the most fleshed out, has the best story in the game, and at one point it was considered canon. But back to Atton. As I said, he's much like Han Solo, and he also serves as sort of comic relief to the game. In fact, he says some really funny lines, especially early on. Kreia, the dark, mysterious seer lady. She sees with the Force and not her eyes. She will most definitely lean on you until you realize this. This allows her to see things from a different perspective. Alright, I couldn't pass that one up. Jokes aside, Kreia is by far one of the most diverse characters of the entire Star Wars universe. This is why we will focus on a good portion of the video on her. She serves as a foil to the protagonist, the Exile. A foil is a character in which contrasts the protagonist. This highlights certain qualities about the other character, or can help tell the story. Kreia was a Force user who leaned gray simply because, although she had been downright dark at points, she also didn't want the galaxy to come to an end, which was what the Sith Triumvirate, or Sion and Nihilus, wanted. Chris Avellone, who was the lead designer and writer of KOTOR 2, was interviewed on Kreia, and he had this to say. Kreia blends elements of the wise mentor, Obi-Wan's robe, mixed with the dark side elements, Palpatine's hood design. Kreia is my mouthpiece for everything I hate about the Force. And then I just let her rant. Please note this next section is going to have a lot of spoilers in it. What you find out about Kreia is that not only did she train the Great Revan, she was considered the large reason he fell to the dark side and disobeyed the council. I put the fell in quotations because Kreia has a very different opinion of this. Perhaps Revan never fell. Difference between a fall and a sacrifice is sometimes difficult. But I feel that Revan understood that difference, more than anyone knew. The galaxy would have fallen if Revan had not gone to war. This was a Kreia quote. Due to being exiled herself, she wandered the galaxy searching for answers and discovered Malachor, where she created Treia's Academy, became Darth Kreia and trained Darth Sion and Nihilus and others to create the Sith Triumvirate who wanted to eradicate all remaining Jedi. However, after being betrayed yet again, except this time by her Sith counterparts, because, like she says, an alliance based on shared hatred is a fragile one at best, she then seeks out the exile who was also exiled, thinking her, or he, the key to saving the galaxy. Or so it seems. In reality, she wants to use Surik as a wound, destroy the Force. She believes this will free the galaxy, because Surik was able to survive without the Force. Kreia thinks this can be the key to saving the galaxy, to rid everyone of the Force and exist without it. Now, I could talk about Kreia for just about ever, but I recommend playing the game if you haven't gotten a real understanding of her character, because you'll get a far better understanding of her character if you do play the game. Play the game. Now, we know the Sith Triumvirate is made up of Darth Kreia, Darth Sion, and Darth Nihilus, hence the name Triumvirate. Darth Sion, he's the Lord of Pain, and Kreia had this to say of him. Yes, of pain he has learned much. Of knowledge, of teaching, he knows nothing. Sion was one of Darth Kreia's apprentices, and one of the Sith Triumvirate. As the Lord of Pain, he was essentially a mostly dead, but sort of living due to constant pain and rage, Sith marauder whose sole goal was to eradicate the Jedi. Sion, based on the records, is actually the oldest of the Sith, since he has actually been around since the Great Sith War, where he originally died, but stayed living. Now Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, well, Visas Mar had this to say about him. He is a wound in the Force, more presence than flesh, and in his wake, life dies, sacrificing itself to his hunger. The Lord of Hunger was a survivor of the war at Malachor V, where many of the Force sensitives died due to the mass shadow generator which destroyed all of the fleet above Malachor, including friendlies. It's likely he lived due to leeching the Force off of others, which created his identity as the Lord of Hunger. He likely was just a regular, Jedi, or just a Force sensitive period. We don't really know much about his past other than that. Bao-Dur, or who I've always pronounced Bao-Dur, was a mostly forgettable character. He's a Zabrak from Iridonia, but he's also a brilliant engineer who developed the Mass Shadow Generator. The Mass Shadow Generator, the long tongue twister of a word, well, it's probably the reason why the Republic won the Mandalorian Wars. The Handmaiden. Holy rumors, Batman. The Handmaiden has a plethora of rumors surrounding her. First, she's an Achani soldier trained by Atris. However, she doesn't really look like her sisters and takes after her mother. She's sort of kind of the emotionless, quiet, but super talented soldier slash disciple character. She doesn't have a lot of personality. And you don't even get her if you're a female character, which is the canon playthrough. But there is some pretty interesting backstory about her. Spoilers! It's rumored that she is actually Kreia's daughter, as Kreia is also rumored to be the great Aaron K, who is supposed to be a Jedi Master who, in the game, is said to have been a master of Darth Revan, or Revan. Now, Revan is said to have many masters, so it's possible that she could have also just been another master as well as Kreia, but most people tie them together and say, well, there's a lot of overlying similarities, I guess I would say. However, damn it, Obsidian, for not finishing that story. The disciple... Oh, sorry. We're on the disciple, right? A Jedi historian who knew the exile before she left for the wars. She probably left for good reason. Yeah. Well, the disciple is just a boring character. He's a romance option, but I question you if you did romance him, because he is boring as a sack of rocks. Visas Mar, she's a Marilucan seer. Well, all Marilucans are technically seers. But she was one of Darth Nihilus's dark slaves, I guess you could say. You can encounter her and, well, she tries to kill you and you end up training her and she becomes one of your followers. Much like Kreia, she doesn't really see with her eyes, but through her use of the Force. She's rather boring personality, but she is sort of a foil in a way, at least a minor foil, because she does kind of give you some key insight on the plot, especially with the Lord of Hunger. Mira, she's the cocky bounty hunter. She has a massive chip on her shoulder. That's probably the perfect way to describe her character. She's a lone wolf personality, kind of likes to do her own thing. And while she was raised by Mandalorians, really not much else to say about her. Hanhar is, I guess, her antagonist of a character. He's the angry Wookiee who only becomes your companion if you decide to have the dark side playthrough. If you kind of have the dark side playthrough in which you help the exchange, then you get Hanhar. You end up getting screwed over anyway, which is funny, but... And then if not, then you end up having Mira. G020, or Go-To, which sounds funny, but he's a droid designed to oversee the reconstruction of Telos, but in typical droid fashion in the Star Wars universe, he somehow can go around his coding and ends up creating a criminal empire because that fits the criteria of assisting the Republic. From the shadows, really, since you're not really supposed to know about it. HK-47, saving the best for last, right? HK-47 is an assassin droid who was owned by Revan previously, in the other KOTOR game. A cold steel killer, since, well, he's not human, get it? He doesn't have blood, so he wouldn't be a cold-blooded... Yeah, anyway, HK-47 is much funnier than I am. He's very blunt and eager to eliminate the meatbag threats. Mockery. Am I alright? Oh yes, master. Why, I am fine. Yeah, he sort of does that a lot, where he tells you the particular tone of his sentence, and then actually says something. I feel like that'd be useful for people who aren't very good socially, because then they would always be like, oh, okay, mockery, you're being okay, gotcha. So now that you guys have a better understanding of the characters, or you already knew the characters but had a nice little refreshener, let's talk about kind of what my opinions are on the characters. Now, not every character, as Chris Avellone points out in his interview, needs to be very complex. That's kind of a common misunderstanding. If you have a bunch of like complex characters, it's harder to understand the plot in a way because your time is spent more on trying to understand the characters. And if they have these very complex motives, then you spend a lot of your brain power like, okay, what are they trying to do? Who are they? Etc. Sometimes you need characters like Beodur, you need characters like Hanhar and Gotu. You need these characters that have rather, you know, simple backgrounds and have very easy to understand motivations. The problem with the characters in this game, however, it seems like mostly a case of they simply didn't have enough time to flesh them out further. If you look at the Disciple, for example, he's such a boring character. And not just boring, but he doesn't really offer a lot of relevance to the plot anyway. I mean, he's essentially a character in which says, oh, I remember you, Exile. I wanted you to train me back then, but then you left and I didn't want to follow. Or, you know, it's like he doesn't really have relevance. The only way he's even relevant to the plot in a way is if you go dark side playthrough and you find out that him and Atton end up going after each other because they want to fight for your affection or whatever. But other than that, I mean, Disciple could be erased from the game and nobody would even care or remember it. Same thing as Handmaiden. Because that playthrough is so not fleshed out well, you could just get rid of Handmaiden and you would never even have a problem. Think about that. In a story, if you're able to just completely remove a character, it means that they don't really serve much point to the plot. Although you saw me kind of trash on Visas Mar a little bit in terms of her being boring, you can't remove her from the plot. She's actually pretty important. She tells you a lot of things about Darth Nihilus that you otherwise wouldn't have known. Mira, she actually saves your life at one point. You kind of need her there because she does end up saving you and helping you in order to get past Nar Shaddaa. Gotu, he helps you as well. Hanhar helps you. HK-47 doesn't really help you in that same sense, but well, actually, you know what he does if you play the M478 droid planet playthrough. HK-47 is actually a rather integral part of the story. He was just kind of cut out, so he wasn't as important as he was originally supposed to be. But then, of course, the strength of characters in this game is brought up by characters like Kreia, Atton, HK-47. There's plenty of characters in this game, including the villains, Nihilus and Scion, that help really round out the weaker characters. And if I would have to look at the characters and say, did I like the characters in this game? I would say yes. But it wasn't perfect, far from perfect. When you have characters that can be completely removed from the plot, the characters aren't as great as one might think. So you've heard me talk about the plot a little bit, and I even gave you the backstory in the beginning of this video. But let's dive into what the plot in KOTOR 2 is like on a deeper level, and why the plot is so good. First, you play as the Exile, a former Jedi general during the Mandalorian Wars who, after being scarred, both literally and figuratively, was then exiled by the Jedi Council for following Revan to war. We don't know exactly where the Exile was before the events at Paragus, only that Atris was planning on leaking her existence so she could lure the Sith out of hiding since they would attempt to assassinate the Exile. She was picked up by a Republic freighter in the Outer Rim. That freighter stopped to help a ship that called for distress. The ship seemed empty, derelict. It didn't seem like there was really anyone on board. They also spotted the Ebon Hawk and took that crew on board. They also seemed dead, except for the droid. I think they just left the droid on the Ebonhawk. The assassins and Scion, however, were hiding in the ship and ambushed the Republic forces in an attempt to kill the Exile, who was passed out. Kreia and T3 and 4 were able to get on the Ebonhawk with the Exile and escape to Paragus. The Exile wakes up on Paragus, meeting Kreia, the mysterious seer. She slowly starts to realize she is gaining the force powers she thought she lost for good due to being exiled by the Jedi Council. She meets Atton, and they escape to Telos. The Ebonhawk gets stolen, and in an attempt to re-find it, they track the Ebonhawk to an academy on Telos, where Atris lives. Atris was one of the masters who also exiled Mitra, so there's a little bit of history there too. After recovering the Ebonhawk and your companions from Atris in the academy on Telos, you also recover a list of the Jedi Masters who are alive, and also, coincidentally, the ones that have exiled you, one and the same. You decide with the help of your crew it's best to track down these masters and find out what happened to you, either to get answers, or to execute them for the perceived wrongdoing they gave her. You go to multiple planets to track these Jedi Masters, planets you can play in any order that have unique worlds and stories to each. The order in which you travel to them also affects the story, not as much as Kotor 1, however. The beauty of the story in Kotor 2 is during this plot, you have multiple other stories playing out as well. For example, you have Scion trying to track you down and kill you, and you have Darth Nihilus trying to attack Telos and destroy the Force sensitives there, or at least early on in the game he's kind of mobilizing his forces. So not only do you have your own personal journey to explore and find answers to, you also have these big threats that are looming that also must be dealt with. This is great because in games you will typically have the main villain destroying the universe as being the plot, and the journey combined. What ends up happening is your character turning out to just be a random person interjected into the story to save the world, i.e. like Master Chief or Commander Shepard, etc. That trope gets rather tiring, and Obsidian has an interesting turn on this in Kotor 2. As all of this also unfolds, you have a hidden threat within you, someone ready to betray you in order to fulfill her goals for the galaxy. As you encounter these Jedi Masters on the planets, you can choose to kill them off one by one, or try and kill them at the reunion on Dantooine, or just try and get them to work together so you can rebuild the Jedi Temple and rebuild the Jedi Order on Dantooine. It's at this point that it's revealed that Kreia is actually Darth Traya, a former member of the Sith Triumvirate. The cool thing about the game is you can actually figure this out if you have enough favor with her, which is rather hard to get because she can be kind of inconsistent in her character. Like, maybe inconsistent's the wrong word, but she almost seems like pointless contrarian at times. There's certain options in the game where it doesn't matter which one you handle or which option you take and the way you handle it, because she still ends up kind of like lecturing you about it. Anyway, so you get to Dantooine, all the masters are reunited if that's the playthrough you go, which is the canon one, and then she destroys the Jedi Masters, drains all the Force out of them as they're trying to attempt to destroy the Exile, because they believe destroying the Exile can save them from the Sith, because they believe that the Sith are only out in Force because of the Exile being a wound in the Force. So after Kreia assumes her mantle as Darth Traya, she goes off and then you have to sort of track her down, but as the whole plot is playing out, the most like intriguing thing about it is that even though Kreia is no longer quote-unquote Darth Traya, the whole time she's pulling the strings. She's trying to get Atris to fall to the dark side so then she can use her in a means to try and go after Darth Nihilus, and ends up luring Darth Nihilus to Telos, which is why he assaults Telos. He believes he's essentially tricked or betrayed into thinking that there's a lot of Force users there, when in reality it's just like one or two, because if you guys remember, the Achani soldiers or the Handmaidens, they're not Force sensitive at all. At least they're not supposed to really be Force sensitive in that way. So you have to go stop Darth Nihilus from bombarding Telos, and then after defeating Nihilus, you now have to set your course on finding Kreia and defeating her or trying to get answers from her. You go to Malachor, where you encounter and defeat Scion, who warns you to be wary of Kreia trying to twist you like she did him. Then you must defeat Kreia, who is hell-bent on destroying you. Kreia thinks you can be used to destroy the Force, as she tires of the Force and its control on the world. You can choose to kill Kreia and assume control of the Temple's dark side energy, that's the dark side playthrough, or the canon response, which you attempt to spare her, she attacks you again, she then draws in the energy of the temple and tells you the future of your companions, the planets that you visited, and the history of Revan, at least what he did after he went to the Outer Rim. She then tells you that she can tell you exactly where he went, and that he went to go defeat the true Sith Empire. Mitra leaves to go defeat this threat, And this is the end of the plot in the game. But the plot continues in the book Revan, where they tell you what happened after. The ending unfortunately leaves you with more questions than answers. So a question people might ask is, what is the difference between the Exile and Darth Nihilus? They both have a sort of wound in the Force about them, right? They both form relationships and they both sort of feed off of other people. The difference, however, if we're considering that the Exile is playing the light side playthrough, Darth Nihilus is more of a parasitic relationship, meaning that he is taking from somebody and they're not getting anything in return. We've seen what he can do to people and what he's done to a planet. Darth Nihilus can essentially drain every bit of life from anything, including things that aren't Force sensitive. The Exile, on the other hand, has more of a symbiotic relationship. Symbiotic in the sense of that there's mutual benefit. Because the Exile means well, she forms these relationships with people in which influence these people to do better and to essentially think, more ambitious or think higher. If they are also Force sensitive, it might unlock that Force sensitivity even more and allow them to become a Jedi. So although Darth Nihilus and the Exile are similar in that they are both wounds in the Force, they go about it in different ways. Kreia attributes Darth Nihilus to the Exile. The Exile, although the Exile could have became a Darth Nihilus, the Exile chose to deafen herself from the Force because, as Kreia says, she was afraid. She couldn't take the pain. The Exile had always formed bonds, but it got even more warped after Malachor because of all these people dying and feeling all these people's emotions and stuff like that. So she has to deafen herself in order to get past that. And that's what makes her so appealing to Kreia, is that she chose willingly to be rid of the Force. And that to Kreia is just the most poetic thing ever, because Kreia hates the Force. She doesn't just dislike it. She always seems like she's dark side, but it's because she just hates the Force. She hates that you have to be controlled by it. You have to be angry to use the Force, or you have to be like a Jedi to use the Force. She wants you to be able to be free of the Force. And that's sort of what the Exile is. The Exile has a sort of freedom about her, and that's what scares the Jedi Council, and that's why they try and essentially drain that Force from you. That's also why Nihilus wasn't able to drain the Force from you, because he tries to drain it from you. And since you are also an Echo and essentially the same thing that he is, he ends up draining himself. So I hope this helps clear up a little bit of the confusion about that plot. Be'odor actually dies on Telos. He dies trying to protect Telos and allowing HK-47 to destroy the assassin droids. So remember, although Kreia set everything up and essentially had Atris fall to the dark side so she would unravel her own teachings and her own beliefs, because Atris was surrounding herself with non-Force sensitives so she could sort of snoop and look into the holograms and try and learn all this knowledge. She was trying to be the Exile and destroy the Sith threat. Kreia uses her, uses Nihilus, and uses Sion all as pawns in the whole scheme of thing, and she wants the Exile to essentially fix all of these problems. Defeat Nihilus, defeat Sion, defeat Atris, and then ultimately she knows that she must also be defeated in order for the cycle to be complete. It's a bit complicated and there are so many theories on the internet, but hopefully this gives you guys a better understanding of things. No, Kotor 3 was supposed to happen, but was scrapped for focus on the Kotor MMO, Star Wars The Old Republic. I don't want to focus too much on how that game or the Revan book handled the story, mainly because I think it's poor storytelling in some areas, how they handle Revan in Exile, for example. This is quite possibly one of the biggest tragedies in storytelling. Such a beautiful story like KOTOR 2 that wasn't finished properly and adapted into KOTOR 3, another RPG like KOTOR 2. The plot in this game is special. Not only does it, like I mentioned in the beginning, scrap the whole traditional view of good and evil and dark and light, it provokes thought after every action you make. As you try and assess the brevity of the situations you encounter, this is the complexity I remarked as beauty of the game. There are a number of ways you could have played the story, but even if you followed the canon playthrough in major situations, which is the light side playthrough, you never really felt like it was too goody-goody two-shoes. And even if you were light side, you still had to make very important and serious decisions. Sure, it's unfortunate that the game didn't support a true neutral playthrough, what with power-ups, class specialization, and influencing your party members, because if you wanted to do those things, you had to have either a dark side or a light side playthrough. But the light side doesn't come off as traditionally good or light, at least not in the typical Star Wars universe way. I do have a gripe with, however, how the dark side is played. It's almost pointlessly evil in some scenarios, almost hard to pass up. You can make people jump off of buildings and fall to their death and kill themselves and kill their own teammates. But I mean, it's entertaining, at least in the small actions. The large actions are more of the Exile becoming kind of like the Sith power. I found myself making a mixture of light and dark side choices in the small term, large term being mostly good. I did have a playthrough where I roleplayed that was hunting down the Masters and executing them since they weren't loyal to the Force and sort of hid things. But then on Dantooine I was treated like a dark side playthrough even when I had full light side. So I learned that that wouldn't work. However, you can choose to unite all the Jedi and then choose to kill them there. That seems to be more supported, though. If you guys know the plot, as I explained a little bit earlier, you can't really do that because Kreia does it for you. So all in all, I love the game. I think the game just has a sort of strange kind of complex beauty to it, even like a dark, mysterious beauty to it. The first time I ever played the game, I was only 13 or 14 years old, and I just remember being like, what happened? Even as you play through on Paragus, the funny thing about Paragus is when you play through it a few times, you get so tired of it because it's kind of the same thing over and over again. But that first time you play it and really play through it and try and figure out the story of what happened on that asteroid mining, facility, you can't help but have just a sense of like, wow, this is a lot deeper and darker than I thought this game was going to be. Especially when you see the cover of the game and it just looks like another Star Wars game. You're thinking Battlefront or other things where, sure, there's killing and there's villains and plots like that, but as I've mentioned, they're not very complex. They're kind of very like cardboard, cereal box villain-esque. So I hope that this video helped you guys get a better understanding of the game and a better appreciation of the game. Maybe it inspired you to want to replay it. I wish I could do that, but I do have to wait a few years to forget some of the plot simply because I've beaten the game way too many times. Now, if you haven't beaten the game, and you definitely haven't beaten the game recently, please download the Sith Restoration mod and the M478 mods. I will put them in the description below. The game plays much better, and I bet you will feel like you're not even playing the same game in some scenarios, and I mean that in a good way, not like it's losing its authenticity. If anything, its authenticity is expounded upon. I thank you guys for letting me nerd rant about my favorite Star Wars game. If you guys want to break down any of the aspects of this game in another video, I can do that and put it more in depth, maybe a focus on certain characters. If you guys have any games you would like to know my opinions on, please comment, and if I like the game or I've played the game, maybe I can make a comment piece on that one as well. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe so you can see more of my opinion pieces in the gaming world and in-depth reviews and impressions of old and upcoming games. If there's one thing I can guarantee to do on this channel is to put a lot of my effort into these videos, give you my full and honest opinions, and try not to really mince any words. I want you guys to enjoy the games that I enjoyed, but I also don't want you to think that these games are perfect, because although Kotor 2 is a beautiful game, it's certainly not perfect, and that's why it took a plethora of mods in order to fix a lot of the lost content. That's pretty much all I have to say. Thanks for watching, guys. nerdSlayer out.